Now I want to talk about animation. Obviously one of Lightwave's strong points. In this course, we're not going to do animation as much as traditionally, I should say, as we've done in past videos. Simply because there's so many cool features I want to get to, such as the instancing and the flocking and the other ways we can animate this time around. So we're going to keep this a little bit more to the basics. So let's go ahead and use this hammer scene just to set up some animation. We're not going to animate the object. We're just simply going to animate the camera. And so to do that, I'm going to change to shaded mode. And that gives us back just more of a traditional OpenGL view. And the reason I'm doing that is because, well, animating with the VPR on is it's great for surfacing, but not needed when it comes to animating, just because it's calculating so much, and we really want real-time feedback when we're animating. All right, so at the bottom of our screen here, and again, this video is just give you an overview of how to animate in Lightwave. We're going to do animation in our upcoming projects. You're going to animate flapping wings on our bat, our cheesy bat, but he's a bat nonetheless. And then you're going to set up animations with other tools. But you need to understand just the basics. So let's do this first. Down here, we've got bones, objects, lights, and cameras. Well, we're going to animate the camera, so we're going to select that. Now, remember that earlier we chose the camera view up here in the top left. That's what we're looking at. That is our view. Well, you have a couple of ways to set up animation, and I have found I've worked with Maya, I've worked with Softimage, I've worked with Cinema 4D, Modo, Lightwave, and a few other $200 animation programs, and some $20,000 ones like Alias many years ago. And I got to say, one of the easiest ones to set up animation has been Lightwave, specifically in terms of the camera. So there's many projects I have that are a little more animation intense. I go into Lightwave just because I can really get in there fast with the camera. Other programs, you might have to go to perspective view like this, and you're trying to manipulate your camera like this and trying to set up animation like this. Well, that's kind of like, having a camera across a room and trying to rotate it with a remote control or something and trying to see what it sees. You want to be up in there. You want to see exactly what that sees. So the first thing you want to do is press the P key after you've selected cameras as your current item. Because in here you need to set this resolution. And we did it earlier. We set 1920 by 1080, a standard high definition resolution. Okay, and that's in the US. It's we're going to keep this, it's interesting because I came from the broadcast days, so I always had to choose NTSC in consideration of our European friends who have PAL. So D1 there is different than D1 by us. Any kind of computer resolution would be these guys here, some of them with a 4:3 ratio. But lately, I want to say about 90% of all of our projects are HD, 1920 by 1080. And what that also means is that our frame rate is at 30 frames per second if we're going to be going to television, or 2997, which is a little more accurate. But if you want that kind of film look, you can do it at 24 frames a second. Well, later when we get to rendering and animation, we'll set that up. But for the most part, the biggest thing is setting this resolution, because that is our camera view. For instance, if I change this to D1, notice these bars on the side here. Now, if I go into, let me see where it is. Let's press the D key, and then this composition overlay is black, and there's one other we can set to. We'll set that to orange. And then your GL view, your default overlay color set to black. We can also make that orange, and our overlay color set to orange. Okay, just so you can see that a little bit clearer. So again, this was the D key in the GL tab, your overlay colors, as well as, depending on what we end up doing, your composition overlay if we get to that point. That way you can see our edges there. So back to the cameras. Now we can see that when we have D1 NTSC, we get a little bit more of this 4:3 ratio. And even though your hammer was on screen, now it's sticking off into that border. So when you render, F9, that hammer's cut off. Okay? So something to be conscious of before you set up any camera animation is to set this resolution in the camera properties panel. And it's always right here, camera and properties, right at the bottom. So resolution, we're going to change it to 1920 by 1080 HD. Now, I have to remember that I still have these yellow borders here. So if I stretch, let's say if I move my camera like this, of course that handle is going to be cutting off that side there. All right, so it's really, really very simple to animate in Lightwave. First, you got to decide what you want to do. And what I want to do is just I'm going to move in fast to this hammer and just kind of slowly rotate around it. Something we haven't done in other videos. Okay, so we're just going to come up here, and I'm going to watch that background. I don't want to see the end of the floor there. So maybe what I'll do, let me open up properties one more time. This zoom focal length, or zoom factor right here, correlates to lens focal length. Now, Lightwave's telling me that we're working with a 24mm lens. Well, I got a photo studio, and I can tell you 24mm lens is a little bit wider than this. So even that, we're going to zoom this in a little bit. Okay, kind of like that. Now, the difference between using that and pushing the camera in is essentially that. Using that zoom factor, you're zooming the camera, kind of like you're pushing a button on a video camera. You're zooming in. By moving in, pressing the T key and clicking and dragging, it's like you're holding the camera and walking in. Okay, so big difference. Now, I don't want to zoom right now. We can set up an animation for that. I just wanted to zoom in a little bit just to give this a little bit flatter perspective. If it's wider, it's going to be really distorted. Next thing I want to do is make sure my timeline is at 0. And that's this guy right down here. And 120 frame animation is fine. That's all we need. And auto key create for all channels is on. Okay, you can do it for modified as well, either one. And what that means is anything we move to, any place in time we move to, and if we move our camera, it will create a key. So what I want to do is hold the camera in this position for maybe 5-10 frames. So what I'm going to do is go to frame 10, hit create key right here at the bottom, and a keyframe, it's a motion in time. It's just saying here, whatever's selected, in this case the camera, be here at this point in time. That's it. So for selected items, the selected item is the camera at frame 10 for all of these channels. And notice when I click OK, you'll see a little yellow mark right down there. Now I've got 2 keyframes, both at 0 and 10. And then I want to go about 5 frames in, and I'm going to press the T key for move, making sure that's on, and click and drag, and then right mouse down, and I'm just going to move right in, rotate and frame that hammer like that. Trying not to get as much of that background in there if I can. Kind of like that. And I can always change the background too. But so in 5 frames, so the camera sits, and then in 5 frames it comes in really fast. But then over the next maybe, I don't know, 4 seconds, maybe 3 seconds. Well, 3 seconds, if we're going 30 frames a second, is 90. Plus 15, right? It's 105. So we'll go to 105. And now, because we're at 105, we have to think, well, where does our camera want to be at 105? Well, not very far. I just want it to kind of move over a little bit like this. And maybe rotate like this. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot of motion for, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. But let's first save the scene. We're going to save scene as, and we'll call this hammer camera motion. I'm going to hit the rewind button, that's this guy right here, and press the play. Alright, so looks pretty good, but it's kind of floating around a little bit. I'll do it a couple times here. I like that real fast zoom in, gives some real impact. So if you notice though, from 0 to 10 where we want it to sit still, camera's kind of floating around a bit there. Why is that? Well, anytime you set up an animation, whether it's an object, camera, Lightwave does it with curves, and that's how you get nice smooth motions. However, sometimes that curve, when you want it to lay flat, needs to be adjusted. So with the camera selected, we're going to hit Graph Editor. It's also Control 12. Excuse me, Control F2. And here is the Graph Editor. Now, we've not talked about this yet, so I'm going to do it now. The Graph Editor, it's where you can envelope a value, technical term. And here you have control over every channel of motion. So in this case, because the camera was selected, let's move this guy up, you can then go into each one of the channels, position or rotation. Those are what we created keyframes on. And notice that when we look at those channels, look at 0 and look at 10. Here is their position and time, and here is their frame from 0 to 120. All right, so what do we do here? Well, your channel bin, this shows all the channels for any selected item. You can add channels to there from anything down here. You can click and drag it up, or you can double click and it'll add it, or double click and add the whole entire group. We don't need to do that right now. I'm going to hold the shift key with the first one selected and then select the last one. That selects all of those channels. With the right mouse button, this is kind of important, use the right mouse button to select all of those first keyframes. In fact, do it again and select all keyframes. Then down here at the bottom, there's tension, continuity, and bias. If I just click and drag tension, look what happens to those curves. See that? Changes their shape. I can go to -1 or to +1. -1 lets something, well here, the better way to explain this is +1 is an ease out, ease in. So notice that it eases out, and I'm going to zoom into that top channel just so you can get an idea of what that is. Okay, and even video editors today have ease in and ease out. Okay, so I just clicked and dragged on that zoom up in the top right corner. So there's my ease out of that keyframe and eases in, just kind of slopes in. If you would change this to negative, now your value slams out of there, and then we should look at the first one. Comes out much harder. It doesn't actually ease out as much. So we want +1. That's the maximum value. And when we do that, it keeps those motions straight between 0 and 10. And while I'm at it, let's talk about continuity and bias. Ones you're not going to use too often unless you got, let's say, something running around a curve or you got some other complex motions. But continuity of 1 kind of makes it pause in between a keyframe. You can actually see the curve kind of stop a little and then keep going. If you go -1, it's the opposite of that. It comes in fast and then kind of shoots out of there, eases out of there. Bias is one I've used before, where you can kind of compensate for a turn. So notice that a +1 value stays pretty linear and we get more of an ease out, ease in, but the backside coming out, it doesn't quite ease out. It still curves out of there. Gives a little English. The bias, if we go -1, it's like you're whipping around a corner and it'll overshoot. Okay, so not one you're going to use all the time, but that's a TCB spline. You also have Hermite splines where you can grab the handles. Bezier splines, which I know a lot of you like. I personally don't like them in here. I think it causes too many issues. Linear, if you just want something really straight, it just turns all those motions off. And then stepped, which is really great for motion graphics, any kind of computer type things. If you're going to do like a animated audio level, things like that, sort of really sharp motions. Okay, but for us now, TCB with a tension of 1. Okay, so that's the graph editor. There are ways you can have footprints saying leave a footprint so when you make an adjustment you'll know where your curve was before. You can auto fit, which is what we just did. You have different display values in here, different options you can use, which don't often get into. One of my books we cover this quite extensively, one of the Inside Lightweight books. And you can do an undo, but I tell you what, that undo doesn't really work so well sometimes, so be really, really careful with that. Okay, so let's close that up. Let's go down here and hit the play button. Much better. Doesn't drift around. Camera holds, it shoots, zooms right down to the hammer, and then slowly moves around. And that's it. You created an animation in Lightwave. One thing you got to be careful about is accidentally animating something like a light. And let me tell you, I've done it many times over the years. Just because you've accidentally clicked on it, you've moved it, and you forgot that maybe you were at this point in time, and you moved the light, and you forgot that the auto key was on. That is one of those things I mentioned earlier about auto scene destruct. Well, it's possible with something like that. You can accidentally move something. So really do some test renders and don't ever just assume your animation's going to be perfect, that there's not something floating around that you accidentally keyframed. Always do kind of a little preview render first. I actually put in -16 here because of my graph editor. So for my pre-roll, which we're just going to press 0 and hit the tab key and get out of there. So there is the animation. Just a real quick one with the camera. Let's take a look at it from the perspective view. If I press 4, click on the camera and hit this guy right here, which centers it out, and then I can zoom it in just to get a little closer. And let's take a look at what he's doing from a perspective view. Back at 0, he holds the 10, zooms in, and then let's uncheck this so it moves on its own. Real nice motions. Press 6 to go back to the camera. And let's say I want to adjust that keyframe real quick. I'm going to move my mouse over to the top of the timeline, and you'll see a little arrow pop up. And when you see the arrow, just click, and their timeline expands. And with this, you can left click over a key, then click on it and drag it. And there, I don't have to change the spline. I don't have to change the graph editor. All I did was just move that keyframe in time. So it holds for 10, and now comes in a little bit slower. Now think about doing something like this on fonts and on a car, and a car zooms up to the screen, things like that. Just kind of that almost bullet in time motion where it just kind of comes in and slows down. So while I'm mentioning this, you can also right-click on the selected keys and cut them, copy them, add a key, delete key, channel edit mode, add a marker, and so on. And you can add a marker that if you're maybe doing some other things and you want to remember where a space was. You don't have to click on a key. You can actually click right on the timeline to do that. Just in case, might be a little memory for you there, a little marker. It's actually a really nice thing to do if you think, okay, that might be somewhere I want to put a keyframe. Doesn't make any difference. It's not adding a keyframe. It's just a marker. So keep that in mind if you're doing some more complex motions. If you want to get rid of a key, just select it and you can press delete. But that's not going to work when the timeline's here. So you either have to do things, you got to right click on it and delete a key that way, or you can move to that point in time, then press delete, and what will come up is same kind of dialogue when we created the key, but for selected items, camera, yeah, that's selected. At what frame? 105, and if you delete it, it'll go away. And then the camera won't actually travel to that path. To jump between keyframes, there's a little plus here, either side to the next keyframe. And of course, you can frame step one at a time here and then rewind all the way. So there you go. Animation Basics in Lightwave 11.